time ever, empowering tomorrow, we are now going to be unveiled the Startup Genomes 2023 Global Startup Ecosystem Report from the one and only JF Gautier, founder and CEO of Startup Genome.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here again this year to reveal our new report. Startup Genome, as you probably know, is the world-leading innovation policy, advisory, and research firms. We advise governments and innovation agencies all over the world. We've advised more than 145 of them in the last few years. And what we do is using the power of data, measurements, benchmarks, to identify what are the best practice innovation policies that actually work. And behind closed doors, talk about which ones have failed and why, so that we don't repeat the errors of others and we can improve as the government's ability to help us entrepreneurs in our community grow even faster. And because it's not a zero-sum game. We can all create more innovation, and more innovation generates more innovation. Our mission is therefore to accelerate the growth of startup ecosystems all over the world so that every society captures its fair share of the new economy and of this new engine that's now the #1 engine of job creation and economic growth all over the world. These are our clients right now, which is a knowledge network that shares those measurements and policies and the impact that they have so that we can do better and better. But it's my pleasure today to officially launch the Global Startup Ecosystem Report 2023. And a huge thanks and kudos to Hazel, who led the best Global Startup Ecosystem Report we've ever produced. And Trish also, and my whole team who are here today, except for Trish, who couldn't be here with us. And this report is our report. It's the report that chronicles the development of our community, of the global startup revolution that is becoming so powerful. Now the whole world knows how powerful we are. And of course, with that comes a lot of responsibilities to do good, to save the planet, to increase our inclusion. But we created this report because the media attention talks a lot about Silicon Valley, New York, London, but the rest of us had no share of voice globally. So this is the report for that, where we have now more than 3,000 quotes from and citations from media all over the world that talks about the other ecosystems, so we can help you brand your city. What are you doing good so you can attract investors, talent, etc. And this is a report that talks about our global community because it's important that we connect. And that's why we're here today. Right? Connecting, when we showed that local community, global community, when we're more connected, when we help each other more, ecosystems do a lot better, but also each startup does better. So community is the gift that keeps on giving, and it gives to you more if you invest in it. So today, and this whole week and few days, right, introduce yourself to people that you don't know. Talk about personal stuff, because we help each other when we connect personally, and offer immediately an introduction to a customer, an investor, a talent, a partner that can be useful to them. Don't wait. So, without further ado, this is the global top 20. This is always interesting, but we rank a lot of other cities, and more importantly in the report is a discussion of each city and what are they good at and why should you pay attention to each of them. I want to point here a few things. For instance, Tel Aviv and Singapore, +2 and +10 in the ranking. And these are very small cities and small countries that are often smaller than the mega cities that they're competing with. And because they led innovation policies starting in the mid-90s, they are reaping the benefits today. So innovation policy really work in helping us creating great companies and our whole ecosystem growing faster and creating more success. Of course, I want to point out the success of Berlin, +3, Seoul and Tokyo, that have been big success stories that were not even in the top 30 a few years back, and now are 12 and 15. And of course, our darling Amsterdam, startup Delta, that, coming, I remember getting a tweet in 2015 when Amsterdam made it to the top 20 for the first time, and the picture was of empty bottles of wine and champagne because Amsterdam had made it to the top 20, but since then grew to the top 12, 15, where it's at today. And of course, Bangalore, India, and this is where, in the last few years, it's been the years of India, startup ecosystems growing so fast, and Bangalore back in the top 20. If we continue a little bit, we can see Miami, incredible success, and I think you've probably all heard of the buzz around Miami that started during COVID, people moving there, free in the sun, and we see it in the ranking, +10, which is an incredible performance. Melbourne, that is also an innovation policy leader, with LaunchVic going up 6 in the ranking. Zurich as well. We've always talked about them being good in R&D, but it was very hard to translate it into entrepreneurial innovation. And now, number 36, they are starting to do well. I mentioned a couple of minutes ago India. India has been the fastest rising economy in the world and the fastest rising startup ecosystems. Bangalore, Delhi, Mumbai, really up in the ranking sharply. While Chinese ecosystems, I think probably due to the restrictive COVID policy, have been coming down at the same time. What is really important to us is that we flatten the curve, that every cities and countries are contributing to this new economy, playing a role and reaping the benefit. And we see that the top startup ecosystem, still North America has the highest number of top 30, but it's been decreasing a lot. So in the past, Silicon Valley by itself was 45% of the exit value of the world. And now we're down to 30 to 35%. And you can see Asia has risen, Europe, Oceania, Latin America, and MENA, and Africa has been doing better and better. And of course, we wouldn't be chronicling our startup ecosystem without talking about what's happening right now, and makes it so difficult for us more and more to raise money and to perform. And we can see it in the numbers, right? The exit of 50 million and more, those that we consider really, significant exits that return economic value to the investors and to the funders. You can see how the numbers have dropped, right? 70, 80% drop, which is really sad to see. When we look at VC funding, we can see also a rapid drop of VC funding. That's total VC funding globally. And we saw a little bit an increase in Q1. I hope that stays. We'll see, but it's pretty dramatic. And when we look at unicorns, you remember in 2020, end of 2020, 2021, more and more unicorns because of inflation and valuations, and now we're seeing the opposite, right? Fewer unicorns in the last quarter were produced than in 2019. So really a big, big drop. And when we look at funding, the drop is across the stages. Late stage funding dropped a lot, 80%, 75% globally, and early stage funding as well. Of course, this is not a log chart, so the early stage funding seems not as affected, but in percentage about the same. But what we see also is that, and what our message to investors and your message to the investors is actually investing during a recession and right after is actually better than investing in normal times. And you can see the chart here. The number of exit multiples in dollars to Series A funding, you can see went up, from the recession 2008, 9, and right after was peaking, right? So that's the message. Really leading investors, people who are contrarian, should be investing even more right now, and rather than less. And so this is your message. Show them the data. Encourage them to actually invest and not contract so much as we've seen. So it's a really good time to invest, and this is when entrepreneurs bring their ingenuity and perseverance to solve problems during a recession and have less competition. And that's why we see those exit multiples actually go up. Finally, coming back on the China versus India, see the rise of India catching up to China in terms of unicorn production, but we see it in exits in funding, etc. So really, you can see how India has risen globally in terms of the startup ecosystems. We've talked about timing, and we've talked about the acceleration of the introduction of technologies and how they grow much rapidly than before. We see it in the numbers. We see that the time to exits has been going down, down, down. We see it with AI, where a couple of years ago we thought we'd have another 5 to 10 years before AI revolutionizes our economies, and suddenly it's at our doorstep. Since 2018, also, we've chronicled the rise of deep tech. We've predicted it. We've showed it in numbers. And when you look at the subsector analysis, you can see that, again, the top growing subsectors are the deep tech subsectors. Advanced manufacturing, robotics, clean tech, AI, and big data, and blockchain leading the way. So I invite you to download the report at startupgenome.com. There's a lot of science articles about what is important for founders to do, and we're about to launch a big scale-up report that will show you the factors from all our research since 2011, longitudinal research, looking at startups that were 1-year-old, 2-year-old that took our survey, and which ones grew to 100 million plus in valuations, and what differentiated them. So pay attention to that. Launching it is at GEC on September 18th. Thank you so much. Have a good conference.
JF Gauthier. Thank you, JF. Fantastic. Fascinating things. Do we learn something about our ecosystem, about future ecosystems? Maybe you're a startup founder, you're looking, where should I be based? Where should I create my startup? I've been a startup founder, raised millions, and fortunately sold my company in 2020. So I've been through that startup journey from founding to exit, and I can be testament to say that it's really important where you're based. Access to capital, access to talent. There are so many elements that are super important to catalyzing and gaining from that ecosystem. So I'm curious, anyone from Miami here? Fastest growing? Miamis? Any Miami? Give us a woo. Definitely from Miami. I love it. Can always trust the Americans to come through. From Bangalore? Any Bangalore ecosystem people? Give us a woo. Woo. There's a small woo over there. So there's a small person. No, I'm sure. We'll have a few people moving there in the near future as well. I've been there. Unbelievable ecosystem, as well as the Asian ecosystems towards China, Huangsheng, incredible ecosystems all around the world. Go check them out. So we're going to have a little panel now, a conversation with JF and a few others. So join me in, I would say a warm welcome, but maybe a cool welcome is a bit more relevant. Who's a little bit hot here? We'll get the doors open, we'll get some airflow. Thank you. I see all of you using your pamphlets or your banners. That's a good idea. So please join me in welcoming Stephen Kushter, Head Ecosystem Strategy at Startup Genome, Leanne Buchanan, President of Miami-Dade Innovation Authority, Constantijn van Oranje-Nassau, Special Envoy and TechLeap.nl, JF, of course, you just saw, founder and CEO of Genome, and Hiro, the Managing Director of Global Entrepreneurship Network from Japan. Give him a round of applause.
What do you want?
Uh-oh.
Okay. Okay, cool.
Shall we?
Yeah.
Good day, Amsterdam. Good day, the next web conference. Thanks for hosting us today. We want to interpret the GSER that Jeff just presented to us, the different trends that are happening around the world. I'm delighted that we have a panel that's really reflective of most parts of the world. Constantijn, no further introduction needed, speaking for Holland, speaking for the European part of the ecosystem world. You are heading up TechLeap, an entrepreneur yourself, a board member in many different fronts, huge experience and participation in the ecosystem. So great to have you, Constantijn. I'm also joined by Leanne, Vice President of Innovation for the Miami-Dade District, and that's not only the city of Miami, but the entire district, 33 cities forming Miami-Dade. And one of the darlings that we just saw on the GSER presentation who went through our rankings at an incredible speed. So it will be hugely interesting to see what has happened here, what can we learn as ecosystem leaders, as policymakers. And last but not least, I'm delighted to have Hiro Tashaguchi here with us today, representing Gen Global, also hugely experienced in corporate innovation, researcher, lecturing professor in the topic, and seeing what is happening in Tokyo. We saw the Vice Governor of Tokyo joining us earlier today. It's incredible, really curious to see what's happening in Tokyo, what's happening in the ecosystem.
Awesome.
Leanne, if we may start with you actually, because you went through the rankings, 23 in the world with Miami-Dade. So tell us a little bit more what has happened in Miami, and allow me to unpick the story a little bit with you. But maybe give us one or two, a little glimpse of what's happening.
Excellent. Well, I think super excited here to represent Miami, and to leapfrog in the rankings is exciting. To jump up 10 points, I think, is something that doesn't happen by accident. I would say one of my favorite quotes is, we either live by intention or we exist by default. And the story of Miami is one of really an intentional and strategic focus in a couple of areas. Firstly, you'll see when we kind of dig a little bit deeper into the rankings, you'll see that Miami-Dade saw 160% growth in terms of economic value. And what that represents is we saw an increase in the number of valuations of our companies, we saw more exits, but that's because you've seen the ecosystem at large really focus in on making Miami a place that is easier to access capital. So there's a couple of key factors that I would attribute to our rise in the rankings. I can't ignore that macro inflection point that was the global pandemic. We saw upwards of 900 people a day moving to Miami during the height of the pandemic. And most of those folks came from some of the larger ecosystems, Silicon Valley, New York, other parts of the Bay Area, and they brought new firms, new funds, great companies, and companies also moving their headquarters. And so we capitalized off of that Miami and looking at how we could really focus on increasing the amount of VC dollars that were both deployed and raised. So since 2020, we saw a 3x increase in the number of VC dollars deployed. I think last year alone, about $5.81 billion. And we also saw a significant raise in the number of VC dollars raised. What's interesting about Miami is our government is also getting in, putting their hat in the ring, if you will. The story of the Miami-Dade Innovation Authority is relatively new. It is a unique effort whereby government dollars are provided to an independent nonprofit to invest into early stage startups. Oftentimes, government doesn't play the role as enabling investment, but here at the local municipal level, we see the vision of our mayor, Daniela Levine-Cava, really come to pass in the Innovation Authority. So we will be investing about $1.5 million a year. We've got about $9 million for the first 3 years to seed our work. And those are just two examples of what I think a strategic and intentional focus on really making, as Francis Suarez says, Miami the capital of capital, really bear fruit in the rankings.
Yeah, and again, shout out to the success of Miami. What I would love to unpack jointly with you and possibly Constantine is a little bit, how do you make growth sustainable, equitable? So we have an ecosystem that's not only helping the 2%, but is really inclusive, that brings employment opportunities to many more people in Miami-Dade. I think we've seen, Constantine, great examples here in Amsterdam with Tech Connect and other initiatives that opened up the job market for broader parts of society. So maybe, Leanne, if you want to start, just a few pointers. What have you done? What are you planning to do to make this growth that's so extraordinary more equitable, more inclusive?
Yeah, I think when we talk about sustainable growth, we forget that it means it has to be equitable. And Constantine, I appreciate in your last talk, you mentioned data. I think data is really important. What we often don't see in some of these larger reports is disaggregation of data by race and by gender. And so while we might see a huge increase in the amount of capital deployed, who is it going to? Who's able to access it? One of the projects that I worked on in Miami is called the REDI scorecard, R-E-D-I, and it was one of the first assessments of our tech ecosystem through the lens of racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so we were able to get 1,400 unique data points, 1,600 participants, and really understand from the race and gender intersectional perspectives who had access. And what was interesting is perhaps white males had a better experience, where their female counterparts rated the ecosystem 20% lower, and then the black counterparts rated the ecosystem 40% lower. So it really starts with getting data that is reflective of different experiences at various stages of growth, various racial and ethnic perspectives, and gender. And I think the other thing, and I definitely want to turn it over to Constantine to add, is to look at where are there leaks in the pathways? Where are there leaks in the talent pathways? Where are there leaks in the funding pathways? And where are there leaks in the growth pathways for startups who may start from different points? Then, as an ecosystem, we can develop the right vehicles, instruments, and programs to be surgical about focusing in on particular groups and particular gaps versus having widespread solutions that may not serve certain populations.
Thank you, Leanne. And Constantine, if you may pick your brains a little bit as well. Amsterdam is one of these places that is very inclusive, at least from what we understand.
Yeah, that's
from
exactly.
Data. And you've done a lot
the
to
generic data. It shows that it's very inclusive, but we have exactly the same problems. Female entrepreneurs get much less funding than their male counterparts. It's very skewed towards white, male, highly educated. So people from minority backgrounds have more problems. So we have exactly these issues. They will have a different source of the problem. There's a lot of research done into this, right? There's nothing new about how that there are certain differences between the female entrepreneurs and their risk appetite and how they interact with a male-dominated venture capital industry and how that works out. And one thing I actually want to share, which I found interesting, is that. So the male-led funds, say that the bulk of the funds that we were working with would say there's a pipeline problem. We can't see female entrepreneurs or the mixed teams. Where are they? And the VC that are led by women say, well, we don't have that problem. We see a lot of really great companies led by women, and we thought, this can't be true. Both things can't be true, but in fact, they might actually be true because. The women that go to a female-led fund would maybe otherwise not raise capital or wait longer. So they might bootstrap or because there's a hesitance towards kind of giving away that power or also not feeling welcomed. But if you then actually are pitching to a fund that is much more understanding about your situation and much more inviting, they actually see that all these talented female entrepreneurs actually going to those funds. So actually it might be true that the way that a fund presents itself is really also a driver for the kind of companies that it will see.
Well, thank you for these insights and using data to more pinpointed policy action. Certainly a great takeaway for all of us as we struggle to be more inclusive, to bring the talent on board that so far is not activated, particularly in these growth stories. I would love to stay for a moment with the great city of Amsterdam and what has happened in the ecosystem here. Number 14 in our report for a few years now. It's an extraordinary position for the city of its size. And I think, Constantine, you also are making inroads with TechLeap in the scaling segment. And it would be interesting to understand what's happening in terms of supporting the founders from a policymaker, from a tech agency perspective on their scaling journey.
Well, I think it started really with Startup Amsterdam being very deliberate about wanting this. So they had a very good program where they had a private lead and a public lead, and so private and public were working together really closely. I think that's been a phenomenal success. We're seeing the same now being replicated in the north of the country, Groningen, but also in Rotterdam, and I think that's really important because typically the government will think of startups as something small, and they don't get that this is basically a whole driver of a different kind of innovation culture that you would like, because there's so much more that comes out of it than just the new employment. typically, even if, in a place like Amsterdam, employment really is not the issue. We have enough vacancies that can't be filled, so adding more employment is really not a driver. It's much more about a cultural change, and that's what they did very well, and they've managed to sustain it. And obviously, it's an attractive place to go to. So we've seen a lot of inbound talent, but I must say it's also been somewhat independent of what the government could actually do, because we did not have the best tax regulations for options, which are usually a way to attract talent. We have not the most fiscal advantageous situation for early stage capital to invest. So some of those things, and we don't have a massive influx of capital through our institutional investors either. So there are a number of things if we could do those, we will be up a few more points. I'm not happy that I'm at 14 or 15. I think we're stagnating, even though others are going fast. So relatively, we're basically staying on the curve. I think if we would have just done a few of those things and be able to do them, then we could have been much higher. I mean, this is an amazing place, and I've seen a lot of ecosystems, but what's nice about Amsterdam and surroundings, it's really compact. There are very few countries that are so compact, and because they're all competing among each other, all these cities, they all have something pretty unique, and once you start unlocking that and actually creating much more of an integrated system, where capital starts flowing and talent flows, and you actually have, from biotech, deep tech, basically all of the domains, very strong in fintechs and payments, but also SaaS and HR tech, for instance. Actually, that's really powerful. So there's a lot of potential still that needs to be unlocked, and it can be unlocked, but it does require some balls, I think, from our government. And I say I look relatively jealously to Miami, because the mayor has been such an incredible advocate, and they've actually just, you told me you looked at the playbook of Israel. Everybody looked at the playbook of Israel, and said, and there are or the UK, and just say, these are a number of policies you can just do. They've been proven, that we've got the data, just do them and you will have success. Well, they did it, 23 points up, or 10 points up to 21st. So kudos to them.
And Hero in Tokyo, you are on the way to similar success. Tokyo is one of these ecosystems firmly within the top 15 in the world. Briefly number 10 for a short while. Well, what is more striking to me is how Tokyo has opened up and Japan has opened up, building connections to our tech ecosystems the world over. Hiro, maybe give us one or two statements about what's happening. Why is Tokyo an interesting place for entrepreneurs, for investors sitting here?
Yeah,
considering coming.
Okay, Stefan, thank you very much. I think I'd like to make a few points. And number one is actually we are using the word ecosystem, but my view is we have two kinds of ecosystem. Number one is a planetary ecosystem, which is deteriorating as we speak, unfortunately. Number two is a human-based startup ecosystem, which we are trying to create all over the places. So this startup ecosystem is a very human-centric and human-driven ecosystem. And the one testament is actually the vice mayor of Tokyo, Miyasaka-san, is right now somewhere in this room because to show his commitment to this kind of activities. That's number one. The second point is actually why do we need to rank cities? As you said, what's the difference between 15, 14, or 16, or whatever? I think the ideal situation, the purpose of having such a ranking is to be inspired and to inspire each other. It's not about actually competition at all. It's an inspiration, I think, mechanism for us to be together because the problem we are having around the globe is so huge and complex and interconnected with each other. So we need to have a connected human-based startup ecosystem so that we can work on these issues globally together as a team of human beings. And with that, I think now we have so many rankings, but hopefully in next decades or even decades, everybody will become like Thai number one. Today we have Silicon Valley, New York, London as a Thai, but I am hoping to see the days that everybody at the Thai, and because we are so matured in terms of human-centric startup ecosystem. So that's my view. But again, Tokyo has some challenges, but I think the report shows that we have accumulated knowledge and experience for the past decade, but we still have a long way to have a connection with the global communities, both ways. And I think the report crystallized our strengths and weakness to some extent. And you know what? Japanese likes to have a homework. If we have some homework, we do it very diligently. So I think we try to fill this gap going forward. Thank you. Back to you, Stefan.
That's wonderfully put. So everybody tied, everybody connected. We know about the importance of global connectivity for our entrepreneurs. Absolutely. I want to come back there very briefly. We are in the age of deep tech, long development cycles, huge capital needs. Is there a role of government? I know that Holland, the Netherlands are looking at developing the even stronger deep tech cluster. You're well underway. Where do we see the public sector engaged? Leanne, I know you are thinking about sector strategies as well and the role of the county in that discussion. Maybe we can start from the Dutch perspective a little bit. Where should we be as government? Where should we rather focus on the entrepreneurs and stay out of the way of particularly deep tech developments?
No, I mean, when there's no capital, then governments play a really big role in having non-diluted capital available for research teams, basically, that are building companies. So for that early stage, when there is just no real business, then there's a gap between the research funding and then the market capital. So that for governments to bridge that there's nothing against it. I actually think it's great. Should do more of that. Of course, when the government stays involved and starts to do direct investing into companies and equity, then you have to be careful. It can be good, but doing too much of that may also crowd out a very healthy market capital. And I'm of the firm belief that we should try to get market money into these companies as soon as possible, because you'll have a completely different conversation. And a completely different growth perspective than if you are working with a government who's trying to nurture the technology, trying to nurture the entrepreneur, and is maybe falls in love with the potential, but doesn't really know how to scale it.
Leanne?
I would briefly add, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think government has an important enabling and supportive role in tech ecosystems. At the Miami-Dade Innovation Authority, our role is to bring private sector and government together around value creation to improve quality of life. And so when we think about deep tech and those horizon technologies, traditionally government has been the first money in terms of research and development, and also setting strategic priorities. Something that's happening in the United States, for example, is the EDA, the Economic Development Agency's funding opportunity around regional tech hubs, where it will designate 20 tech hubs around key technology focus areas. So here, government has a carrot, which is funding, to incentivize collaboration amongst the private sector and local stakeholders to focus on specific technologies that provide that ecosystem a competitive edge, both nationally and globally. And I think that's a good example of the type of role that the government at the federal level can play. And similarly, we are doing it on a smaller scale in climate, housing, healthcare at the Innovation Authority in partnership with our county.
Thank you. We are nearly out of time, but I don't want to miss the opportunity. Particularly here, I would like to ask you about the perspective of better corporate startup ecosystem collaboration. Japan is full of these large aggregators in tech, these large technology firms, ideal business-to-business customers for many entrepreneurs amongst us. I know you have some distinct thoughts about where you stand, what's happening. I think Japan is opening up. I think, Constantine, in our discussion, we also talked about the huge potential that still remains in the Netherlands and Europe around activating traditional corporates to work closer with us as founders, as ecosystems. But Hiro, maybe give us a few thoughts.
Just 2 words.
Please.
Actually, there are 3 kinds of unicorns from my perspective. Unicorn independent, unicorns within enterprise, and unicorn between enterprise and startups. So I think optimization of 3 kinds of unicorns in each ecosystem and globally is very important. And for Japan, enterprise we have a very strong enterprise globally, but they are kind of struggling to become more innovative. But by working closely with the startups globally, globally. And I think we can, work together. And also for enterprise around the globe can work with the Japanese startups together as well. So it's not a one-way transaction. It's a two-way human-based transaction and ecosystem building. So I hope we can work together globally going forward.
Great. Constantine, maybe last thoughts on how do we get better in Europe at engaging our traditional corporate sector, innovating quicker in these technologies and deep tech that are so important to,
Yeah, I think somebody made a distinction between corporate venturing and corporate venture capital. I think corporate venturing is a much bigger body of activities, and it's really about how do you, as a corporate, design an innovation culture which is open to crowd in innovation, but also to have an open culture internally to make sure that innovation actually pays off. And so corporate venturing is always seen as a bit, corporate venturing capital is seen as dumb capital, usually. But if it's done well, and it's now, I think some companies actually understand how to do it well, and you really are putting the assets of the company behind your investment, and you're actually opening up your client base, your technologies up to these startups, it can be a very powerful tool, especially in this deep tech space. So I would like to see much more of it. Let's learn from the best, but we still have quite a way to go.
Thank you. Important conversations that we should unpack in great detail. Personally, I loved one takeaway, that is leading the inclusiveness, the diversity discussion by using data more effectively to have a real clear picture and devise our actions, programmatic actions, policies, whatever we want to do in our ecosystems with a bit more rationality and to really pinpoint where's the pain the greatest, where can we interact and help the best. With that said, thank you very much, Lien, Hiro, Constantine. Thank you very much for joining us on the Startup Genome panel this afternoon, and thanks the Next Web for hosting us here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And